my beautiful buds. Welcome back to my channel, Sprouts with Joy. My name is Joy, and if you like to talk about plants, you're in the right place. It is truly January. It's snowing right now, and it's absolutely freezing cold. But today I wanted to share 5 of some of my favorite plants right now. We're kicking off the year strong with some really beautiful plants. Every month I love to feature some plants that have really been standing out to me, so here are my January favorites. The first plant that I want to talk about is the lemon lime maranta, or Maranta leuconora lemon lime. I also have the red veined maranta, or the Maranta leuconora erythronera, I think is what it's called. But this one is the one that has the green venation as opposed to the red venation, see? And it's pretty much all green. I also love my red vein maranta, but this month, this one has just taken off, which is inexplicable to me because it's literally January. And generally speaking, in the winter time, I mean, some plants will do fine, but a lot of plants do go dormant, or they just start putting out scraggly growth, or they might be prone to pests just because they're stressed out from the changing environment. But no, look at this plant and look at the shape. The shape in particular as well is another factor that I have been obsessed with. Like, the way that it's growing right now is so nice. In the past, I've had these plants, you know, get really leggy sometimes. You know, they'll lose a lot of leaves along the stem and only have a few at the front part of the plant. But just right now, I just wanted to capture this moment. Look at what this plant looks like right now. Are you kidding me? The leaves are all perfect and they're laying in the perfect way, and I just have so much, I just have a profound appreciation for that. Every time I look at it, it makes me happy and it tickles me. And I actually also recently moved it to a new location, and number one, it just looks so good in that spot. I'll try to link the video in which I moved this plant so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But moving this plant to that new spot has just ignited that love and passion that I have for this plant. That might be a little bit strong, but I do think that there's something to moving plants around psychologically. If you're getting bored of a plant, if you move it to a new spot, sometimes that can really make you love the plant again because you're noticing it in a new way. But anyways, I've been loving it in that spot. It's also been really thriving in that spot since I moved it there. It started putting out a lot of growth. So right there is a new leaf. There's also a new leaf coming in right here, if you can see that. And I think those are the main 2 new leaves that are coming in. But like, hey, 2 new leaves in the middle of winter, like, I will take that. I also love that they look like little taquitos. But anyway, I do think that this plant has never looked better, which is saying something because the Marantaceae family, of which this is a part, I mean, it's a maranta, it kind of gets a bad reputation for, you know, it looks great in the greenhouse, but then you bring it home and it just gradually deteriorates over time, which, I mean, that can totally happen sometimes. But honestly, I feel like marantas, like, they get lumped into like the calathea category, but once they get used to your environment, I don't know, I've personally found these plants to not be extremely fussy as long as you're keeping up with watering, because they don't like to be underwatered. But as long as they don't have a pest, number one, because they can be a little bit more prone to spider mites, but just look out for that. And as long as you're watering them, I mean, honestly, like, this plant is doing great with, like, I kind of treat it mostly the same as all my other plants, to be completely honest with you. Like, it's really not, it's really, the only thing would be, yeah, it's maybe not as forgiving. It's not super drought tolerant, as long as you stay on top of watering, is what I'm saying. Like, it doesn't need extra humidity. This is an ambient humidity, which right now in the winter is hovering around 35 to 40%, which is not that high. I've been trying to get better about fertilizing my plants, but historically, I've not necessarily been great at fertilizing my plants. So yeah, it's not even that, it's just, it's doing well. So that's all I wanted to say. This is my alocasia frydek, and wow, like, I still can't get over the fact that I actually have this plant. I recently repotted it into this self-watering pot, which I think it's been liking because it just gave me this new leaf. Hang on, this is making me nervous because these are 2 pieces, so I'm gonna move the glass piece onto the table because I did not trust myself. But now this way I can kind of tilt it a little bit more, because I'm also afraid of harming this plant. I'm very paranoid. But yeah, it did give me this new leaf. Like, once I repotted it, it just shot out this new leaf pretty much immediately, and it literally just unfurled. Look at that. Look at that. Oh my gosh. I'm obsessed. Hang on, I need to look at it. It's so pretty. It's literally so pretty. I'm mainly including this in my favorites because obviously the new leaf is just, it's incredible. But also every time I look at this plant, it makes me really, really happy. I know alocasia frydek, I've seen a lot of people talking about variegated alocasias and them being really trendy right now, which, like, okay, that's cool. And that makes me happy to own this plant, but at the same time, I think that this is one of those plants that has a timeless beauty, if that makes sense. I mean, even my non-plant people, friends and family, when they see this plant, I mean, they'll be like plant blind to my entire house. They might notice, oh yeah, you have a lot of plants, but they're not often particularly pointing out or noticing a plant. They might point out the Rhaphidophora tetrasperma, which I have growing up my wall, which is a big statement because it's massive. It's literally, it's hitting the ceiling right now. But then this is the other plant that people see and they're like,
whoa, what is that? That is beautiful.
And that's really cool because I love that people that aren't even plant people can recognize the beauty of this plant and they notice it. It's very striking and they see the variegation and they're like, okay, that's really cool. That's intriguing. Tell me more about these plants. So honestly, this is almost like a conversation starter. It's a gateway plant, which, I mean, okay, I probably wouldn't recommend this plant to complete beginners because alocasia are known to be a little bit finicky sometimes. And also this plant would be a very expensive plant to start out with. But if it opens people's eyes to how beautiful plants can be, I think that's definitely a win. In the past, I think that has been the Monstera albo. When people see the Monstera albo or like a variegated Monstera, they would be like, whoa, like that's really intriguing. You know, when Monstera albo was at its height, Monstera albo is still incredibly popular. But I feel like the alocasia frydek has gained a lot of notoriety recently. Like a lot of people have been talking about it, even though it's been around for a long time. And yeah, that might be part of the reason, is that people that aren't even planting people notice it and they're like, I want that. That's actually really cool. But honestly, this plant has been doing a lot better than I expected it to do in my collection. I will be completely honest as well. I like left it in its old pot in peat and in ambient humidity in the winter for like, I think it was 2 months before I finally repotted it. On the one hand, I'm glad that I let it acclimate to my environment before really doing anything. But on the other hand, it did lose a few leaves or drop a few leaves. And I think that was mostly normal because they were older leaves, but it wasn't really growing a ton to replenish those leaves because it was just not in ideal conditions. But I have since repotted it and moved it into my cabinet. And yeah, I think it's doing a lot better under those circumstances. So I'm hoping that we continue on that upward momentum. I don't know what the word I'm trying to use is, but yeah, alocasia frydek. It's so pretty. This next plant is my Anthurium villanaeorum, which has a new leaf, and that is the primary reason that it's my favorites list. So, okay, I received this plant as a rehab plant from a friend, and it was in pretty rough shape. I mean, she told me very straight up, she was like, this plant is not in good shape, you'll have to rehab it, but do you want it? Just pay shipping. And I was like, absolutely, I would love to give it a try because I love Anthurium and I actually really enjoy Anthurium villanaeorum. I think it's really pretty. But yeah, so it was honestly in pretty rough shape. I mean, see, like this leaf right here is rough. I had to like cut off a lot of browning off of this leaf, and a lot of the leaves are like in rough shape. And for the longest time, there was a growth point on this plant, but it was kind of dormant. It wasn't emerging into anything. So I was just waiting and waiting and waiting. I had it in a prop box for a really long time, just in like 100% humidity, letting it recover, letting the root system grow and develop. And then I moved it to my greenhouse cabinet, I want to say maybe a month ago. And I noticed 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago, it started putting out a new leaf. And initially the leaf, you know, Anthurium leaves, they start out really small and then they grow. But the way that this one looked, it looked like it was almost finished growing and it was like this big. And I was like, oh, you know, that's fine if it has a really small leaf because it's been through a lot. Like I don't really expect it to be super mature, but no, you guys, I checked on it again recently and I was like, oh my gosh, this leaf is so beautiful. And it's this one. And I'm pretty sure it's still hardening off. Like it's not even done yet in terms of growing. but it's immaculate. I'm so excited because it's not, I mean, it's just such a perfect leaf. Like, it's kind of hard to show you because it is growing in an awkward direction. But like, look at it. Ah! It's honestly perfect. It looks perfect. And it's so soft and so beautiful. And I'm just, there's something remarkably rewarding to rehabbing a plant and seeing that first perfect leaf. Because I don't know if you're familiar with Anthurium, they can be a little bit prone to like leaves ripping as they grow, especially if they're not in ideal conditions or you haven't watered them enough. But like, it's perfect. And I think we are far past the point of like when the leaf would be mangled or ripped or anything like that. And yeah, that's all I really have to say about this one, is just that I got it as a rehab plant. This is the first new leaf that it's given me, and it has surpassed my expectations. I don't know, I just felt like this would take a lot longer to give me a leaf like this, because it was in pretty rough shape, but I'm just...
It gives you the fuzzy feelings.
This is a Hoya pubicalyx, and this is a plant that like I thought was
Fine.
but I never really fully appreciated it. I think when I first got it, it had flat mites, and it was a very experimental purchase, and I wasn't that into it, but I noticed that the splashing was pretty nice, and it had like pinkish, purplish hues to it. So yeah, I did get it largely as an experiment, and it maybe was $6. So I was like, why not? Let's just go for it, even though I didn't really like it that much when I bought it, if that makes sense. This is a plant that has truly grown on me. Especially this month. So I'll let you take a look at it. It's kind of hard to show it on camera fully, but like, I'm gonna get out of the way so you can actually like see the leaves because the camera's wanting to focus on my face. But like, do you see how gorgeous these leaves are? They're so long and sharp, and the splash is stunning. Like, look down here too. These leaves are more green, because that's another thing. This plant, when the leaves are emerging, they've been coming out very purple. So I don't know if this means that it's like a royal Hawaiian purple pubicalyx, or if that's specific to the blooms. I don't know, you'll have to let me know. But like, I am so into it right now. And again, this is a plant that like, I never really paid much mind to. It's really just mostly done its own thing. Look at that. Because originally the growth was very stubby, knobby, gross. And again, I think that that's because when I first got this plant, it had flat mites, and at the time I didn't know what flat mites were. I mean, I think I've had this plant for like 2 years. Like, it's been a minute. And it never really took off for me until I ended up putting it on my greenhouse cabinet maybe 6 or 7 months ago. And that's when it started growing, but I didn't really get a good look at it because it didn't have a trellis at the time. It grew, but it was like growing in kind of a funny way. It was clinging to like my window blinds and growing up the wall, and there would be new leaves, but since they were so far away from me, like I noticed them, but I wasn't completely enthralled because the way that the plant was presented, it was all very spread out and it was far away, so I wasn't really looking up close and personal to the leaves. But I was moving some things around recently, and I decided on a whim to go ahead and trellis this plant because I was like, you know, I want to move it. I'm going to remove it from the wall and like the window blinds and that sort of thing. And I felt kind of bad taking it down because it had been so happy growing up there, but I wanted to appreciate it in a new way. So I wanted to switch things up, and I ended up putting it on this trellis. And now that it's presented this way, and now that it's actually like a little bit more up close to me, and as I was repotting it, I was looking at the leaves and I was like, oh wow, like this is actually like a really good looking plant. It was just like, I don't know, I had never seen it this way. And I do think that there is something so beautiful to appreciating a plant or seeing a plant in a new light, especially if it's never been a favorite plant of yours, but it's just all of a sudden this plant has been growing so well. And specifically this month, I have gotten a lot of joy from looking at this plant, and I hope that it continues to do well for me because I did kind of change its circumstances a little bit, but I think that I will always have a profound appreciation for this plant now, because like it's like now that you see it, you can't unsee it type of deal. And I don't know, the Hoya calyx is sometimes regarded as a pretty basic Hoya, but I have a specimen that is really particularly splashy. And again, the leaves have been getting so big. Look at that. That's like almost the length of my hand. So yeah, I'm really loving this plant. And the last plant on my favorites list for January is the syngonium albo, and this one is honestly a classic. I think my love for this plant has been reinvigorated, and again I think part of it is that I did rearrange some things and move this plant a little bit, but also some of the leaves it's been coming out with recently have been just so pretty. I was taking a close look at them recently, and okay, look at this variegation. Like, look at this one. Look at that. There's even some leaves that are down here. I want to be careful to not like break this plant. Even some of the leaves down here just have really, really beautiful variegation. This plant has had its fair share of pretty much totally green leaves, as well as like totally white leaves that I usually cut off. I actually recently made an Instagram post featuring this plant, and in the caption, I think I wrote something like, syngonium albo has some of the best variegation. There was resounding agreement. I think that this is commonly regarded as one of the prettiest variegated plants out there, because like the variegation pattern of this plant is honestly like unmatched. It's so beautiful. It's very similar to the alocasia frydek. It's just, you look at it and it's just objectively, the variegation specifically, like the variety that you can get is just so good. Oh, and I'm also really excited because it's coming out with some new leaves. This is one of those plants that, like, can you see that too? There's a new leaf coming in over there as well that looks like it's gonna be gorgeous variegation. This is one of those plants that's honestly always growing. It always has new leaves that are coming out. This was one of my first rare plants. I think that I maybe spent like 60 bucks on it for 4 leaves or something. So it was a really small plant. Nowadays, I mean, you can get a really good sized plant for 20 bucks or even cheaper. Although I have heard that some people have been having a hard time finding syngonium albo. It's like the greenhouses overproduced them, and then there was an oversaturation, the price plummeted, and then they stopped producing them. So nowadays it might be getting more difficult to find them again, although it's pretty ubiquitous in most plant collections, I think, unless they died. There was definitely a spike where people were seeing them everywhere, and now apparently they're not everywhere. So I don't know, let me know if you've noticed that one way or the other. But even though this plant is pretty easy to grow and it's a very fast and vigorous grower, I can understand why this was regarded as a rare plant, honestly mostly because of its beauty. It's just a really attractive plant. It's really popular. There's a reason that this was one of the first like rare-ish plants that I bought, because it was one of my favorites. Just seeing it on social media, seeing it online. And I think for a while my love for this plant diminished, or at least I wasn't like actively noticing it as much. But this month in particular, I've noticed it again and fallen in love with it all over again. I do think that I want to try to switch up the way that I've been growing it, because I did, so I like maybe a year and a half ago, I chopped and propped this plant and I repotted it into this pot with a plank. And I was really hoping that the plank would, I don't know, promote growth or give it a good way to climb, but I'm not really a fan of it. It's very unstable. Like, look at this, it's just wobbling and it makes me nervous. So I think that I do want to potentially, I mean, I'm a little bit worried to do this, but syngonium albo does prop very easily, so I'm not incredibly worried. I just don't want to regret it if I do decide to do this. But I was thinking about kind of chopping it back and then repotting it without the plank, and then obviously potting the propagations back into the pot and trying to grow it in a more bushy way rather than kind of climbing vertically because, yeah, I mean, it's not attaching to the plank. It doesn't seem particularly affected by the plank one way or the other. If I were to grow it vertically, I might rather choose a more like lightweight option, like a trellis as opposed to a plank. So I don't know, we'll see. I might be experimenting a bit with how I want to present this plant moving forward, but as of right now, honestly, strictly because of how beautiful the leaves are, I love this plant. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the way that I'm growing it right now, personally. At least just from a practical perspective, every time I pick up this plant to water it, I'm nervous that it's gonna topple over because the plank is honestly really heavy and it's not super secure in the pot. Actually, please let me know if you have a syngonium albo, how do you grow it? How do you like to present it? Do you have it like climbing something? Do you have it supported? Do you just grow it really bushy and propagate it and prune it often? What vibe are you going for with this plant? Because that's something that is an ongoing thing I'm trying to figure out, because actually Syngonium podophyllum, which is the species of this plant, it's the cultivar is actually the albo, I think, to my understanding. But it's Syngonium podophyllum, like a lot of the other Syngonium varieties out there, like the Syngonium confetti, that's actually Syngonium podophyllum, quote, confetti, you know? So I've had several Syngonium podophyllum plants in my collection, like just different cultivars, different varieties, and I can never figure out how I want to grow them. I can never decide because oftentimes if I just let them grow, they just get so gangly because they lose the lower leaves and then they are awkward, which like this isn't bad, but it's not as full as I would want it to be, and I was mostly kind of biding my time, hoping that it would look better over time, and it's okay, but I'm just not the biggest fan for the reasons I've already talked about. But I will say of all the Syngonium podophyllum varieties, this is a plant I will always have in my collection, I think. Even though, like other Syngonium podophyllum varieties, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of a lot of the time because I don't like the way that they grow. But because the leaves of this plant are so gorgeous, I'm willing to tolerate it and do everything I can to make it grow beautifully. Okay, that's a wrap. That's going to be it for this video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and if you did, please feel free to leave a like, comment, subscribe. All those things are super helpful for my channel. And I hope that you have a wonderful and blessed day. Bye-bye!